everyone, this is quite a long video, so I figured I would throw these up just for anyone that is here for the specs or just needed a quick memory refresh. If you're a first timer and you've never done this before, I recommend going through the whole video. There's a lot of good information in there, but thanks. Well, hi everyone. The plan today is to try and do some overhead or valve adjustment on my 5.9 common rail here. So this is a 2004 and a half truck, or a 2005. Usually a half model year is whatever body style it was the previous year, and then the engine from the new year. So this is a 2005 engine, 2004 body. So for those of you who have never set valve lash or done overhead, it's pretty simple. If you've done it on 12 valves or if you've done it on pretty much any other engine, the principles are the same. You're going to need feeler gauges, you're going to need to take the valve covers off, and you're going to need whatever tools you need to adjust the adjuster and torque back down the jam nut. So it's the same principles here, and let's get into it. Step one, get your topside crawler / creeper thing. Now step two is going to be taking off the valve cover. Now, I've read different things, I've heard different things. Some people say it's better to do these adjustments when the truck is cold. Some people say to do it warm. Usually when it's cold, there's going to be a difference in your tolerances. So for this truck right here, I'm going to be setting the intake at 10 thousandths and the exhaust at 20 thousandths. Now I've heard that if you're going to do it cold, you should do it around 4 thousandths smaller than you would do it hot. So if I'm setting the intakes at 10 when the truck is hot, I should be setting it at 6 when it's cold. Things expand when they heat up, your tolerances get bigger. So I'm going to be setting it at 10 and 20, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So don't mind the mess in here. I haven't opened this hood in a while, but step number one is take off the valve cover. To do that, you're going to take this oil cap off, take this little cover off with these 4 bolts, and then there should be, I believe, 6 bolts on the actual valve cover itself. And then after that, we'll take a breather hose off, or maybe before the valve cover, we'll take the breather hose off and get started. Now, it is a good idea, especially if yours looks like mine, to, before you remove this whole cover, go ahead and wipe all this crap off. All this oil, dust, all that good stuff. Now, if you'll notice, mine is pretty disgusting. And it's all oil, and it's all sitting on top of the valve cover, which tells me that it's the breather. So either this filter is pretty plugged up. Probably is. I don't think I've ever changed it, and I've put, I don't know, 50, 60,000 miles on the truck. Or it's got excessive blow-by, which I check it every once in a while. It doesn't. It runs fine. But who knows? If you'll also notice, I don't know if you can tell on camera, but I've got some kind of fuel leak. There's fuel all in here. I kind of knew that because I can usually smell it when I get out of the truck. I just smell fuel. Now, it's not bad enough where I'm not going to drive the truck, but it is something to look at. It might be a good idea to get some new hard lines for the fuel rail, but who knows. Now, that is another thing that I want to talk about. If your truck is chattery like mine and you think maybe it's the overhead, while you're in there doing overhead, it's a good idea to check these plastic vibration dampeners that go on these fuel lines. It's usually number 3 or 4 that goes, but one of those chattering will sound exactly like valve train chatter. So while I'm in here doing overhead and I have a little more room, I'm just gonna check all of these little blue clamps, and if they rattle, that's probably my issue. But since we're already here, we're gonna go ahead and do some overhead on this thing. This truck has got new injectors, a new turbo. I was in here maybe 6 months ago, did overhead on it, and the reason I'm doing it again, it hasn't been about 50,000 miles, which is when you want to do overhead, but when I did the injectors, I had some issues. I couldn't get the truck started after I did injectors, and bleeding the lines wasn't helping, so I pulled the injectors back out, which, if you've ever done injectors on these, it requires you to pull these rocker pedestals off. Now, I set the overhead the first time I put them in. When I took the injectors back out and put them back in, I never reset the overhead. I just bolted them back on and torqued them. Technically, you can do that, but you probably want to reset overhead every single time you loosen these or take them off. Now, tell that to me, who was 12 hours deep into figuring out why his truck won't start and just wanted to get it back together, because I did not. But we're gonna go ahead and do it now, and it looks like my gasket for my valve cover is holding up pretty well until you get to the very end. That's where it's kind of leaking out oil. It's not something I'm going to solve today. It's not bad enough where I really care to address it. It would be super easy. The gasket just sits in the bottom right there of the valve cover on the bottom rib. It's another thing to pay attention to. Make sure this spring in the valve cover does not fall out when you take the valve cover off. What does it do? No idea. But make sure it's in there. It's probably important, maybe. So, next step is we are going to get this engine barred over into the right position to do overhead. So I don't know if you can see it down there, but last time I was in here I marked it so that little white line represents a mark on the dampener, and it says TDC next to it. That means top dead center. Now we want that mark directly up and down right here. So it looks like we're gonna have to go backwards a little bit past here and then come back just to make sure the lash and the gears doesn't mess with it. So we're gonna go ahead and put that directly up, and then we'll see if we're in the right stroke. Now, there's multiple ways to bar this engine over. you can either put a ratchet, whoa, you can put a ratchet down there on the dampener. There's 15mm bolts, and you can bar it over that way. The way that I usually do it, if your engine's healthy, you can put a 15/16 socket in here on the front of the alternator, and you can bar it over that way. That's the way I've always done it. It's kind of tough to get it in there. You kind of have to put the socket on and then smack the ratchet into the back of it, but it works. You only have to rotate it over, you know, a couple times. So, well, alternator didn't work. It works if you go counterclockwise, but not clockwise apparently. Science, I don't know. But we're gonna go off the dampener. So we're in the 12 o'clock position with the top dead center mark. Now, in order for this to work and do it correctly, you have to be on the correct stroke. So, if a good way to tell is which ones are loose, which rocker levers are loose. So right now, if we're on the right stroke, both the exhaust and intake on number 1 should be loose. Now if we check it, they are not. They are not loose. So that means we need to do a full 360 degrees to get onto the right stroke. So we've done our full 360 degrees on the dampener. Our mark is back up at the 12 o'clock position, straight up and down. Now, when we had it in the 12 o'clock position last time, it was on the wrong stroke. So when it's on the right stroke to start adjusting, the intake and exhaust on number 1 should both be loose, meaning that the valves are closed. There's nothing pushing on the top of the valve to open it. You never want to adjust anything. Really, you can't adjust anything if the valve is open, meaning that something is pushing on the top of that valve to open it, and that's something being this rocker lever that you're about to adjust. So now that we are in the right position, because these rocker levers on number 1, the exhaust and the intake, are both loose. That's how you can tell if they are loose, is just by wiggling them. They should rock back and forth just a tiny bit. Now, if they don't, if you go to rock it back and forth and it's just solid, that means that that valve is open or partially open and you can't adjust it. Now that we are in the right position and on the right stroke, we can adjust 1, 2, and 4 on the intake and 1, 3, and 5 on the exhaust side. Now, after you get the valve cover off and everything and you get the engine barred over, the only tools that you're going to need to complete this job are a 9/16 wrench, your feeler gauges, an Allen key that I don't know the size of, but it fits on the top of the adjuster. So get one of those. Make sure it's the right one, because if you strip one of these out, that's not good. And then the last thing you'll need to finish up after you're done adjusting it is a torque wrench. After you've adjusted it and tightened that nut down, you're going to want to torque it to 18 foot-pounds. And that's about it. The unfortunate part right now is when you get to number 5 and 6, these angled feeler gauges don't usually cut it. So my straight feeler gauges have ceased to exist. I just spent 10 minutes looking for them, and they don't exist anymore. So we're going to do the best we can. If we have to, we'll put one of these feeler gauges in a vise and straighten it out. Look, you can see the oil on these from the last time I did this. But we're going to go ahead and get started. So we're going to do 10 thousandths on the intake and 20 thousandths on the exhaust. I believe the spec for it being within tolerance on the intake is like 6 to 15, and then don't quote me on this, but I think it's 15 to 30 on the exhaust. So 10 and 20 right in the middle. That's usually where you want to go. You never want to put it right at the bottom because it might be a little tight, and like I was saying before, if you do that hot and you put it right at the bottom, that means when it's cold, it's going to be even lower. So let's say you put it at 6 thousandths on the intake when it's cold, or I'm sorry, when it's hot. That means when it's cold, it's probably going to be closer to like 2 thousandths, which is way too tight. So right in the middle is usually your best bet. You can do that hot or cold. Now the other thing to mention, I believe Cummins quick serve, I'll look later, but I believe it mentions putting a little bit of oil between the rocker lever and the valve bridge while you're doing this, and it's kind of not optional to do that if you're working on it in a vehicle. If you're an engine builder like me and you do it while it's dry, it's the same thing. You just have to know how it feels. Overhead and valve adjustments are often a just knowing how it feels kind of thing. There are some shops that'll do a standard uniform procedure of you'll put the feeler gauge in there, you'll adjust the adjuster with a T-handle or something to a certain inch-pound, and then just lock the nut down. They do that to keep it standard. If they have a lot of people there doing overhead, everyone does it different. They want everything to be standard. But if you're doing it on your own vehicle, or your shop or whatever doesn't require that, it's okay to just take an Allen key or a ratchet with an Allen bit and just get that right perfect feel. But we're gonna go ahead and get started. I'm gonna adjust 1, 2, and 4 on the intake, and 1, 3, and 5 on the exhaust. So one thing that I might mention before I get all this done, but an easy way to identify which is your intake rocker lever and your exhaust rocker lever are, 1, the length of them, or the size of them. So your intake is usually going to be smaller and your exhaust is going to be longer. Now, I'm not going to say that's uniform on all engines. On most Cummins it is. Every Cummins I've ever worked on, that's usually what it is. But if they're both the same size for some reason, you can follow the exhaust rocker lever and it should be right next to an exhaust port, because that valve is right next to the exhaust port. So if we follow the intake, which is the shorter one, and we go to in whatever direction your exhaust manifold is, in this case it's on the passenger side or the right side, if you follow that intake rocker lever, it's going to run into nothing. If you follow the exhaust, it's going to run straight into an exhaust port on your exhaust manifold. Now, another thing to mention, so I was mentioning the specs before. Your spec for the intake is 6 to 15. So if you're just going in here to check if you are in spec, what you can do is first put the highest of the spec in. So you'll take a 15 thousandths feeler gauge and slide it in there. If you can slide that in there easy, that means you're at least at 15 thousandths. Now from there, you can either just go ahead and adjust it, or you can continue putting more feeler gauges in it. So you'll go to a 16 and try and slide it in, a 17, try and slide it in. Eventually you'll get to a spot where you won't be able to slide that feeler gauge in there. Now if your max spec is 15 thousandths and you can just slide a 15 in there, unless you really want to know what it's at, just to tell your buddies, oh, look how messed up my overhead was, you can just go ahead and adjust it. If my intake was at the max spec and it easily slid in there, I already know I have to adjust it. So do what you want, but that's how you check. If you're just going in there to check, or you just want to see what they're at, that's the way to do it. Start with, go to the max spec, see if that'll slide in there. If it does, keep going up. If it doesn't, start going down, if you truly want to know what it's at. But if the 15 can slide in there and your max is 15, go ahead and adjust it. That's what I'm going to do. Off camera, I just went ahead and grabbed a 10, slid it in there, and then I remembered, well, I should probably check what these are at, considering that I really am just going in here to see if they're still in spec. But we're going to go ahead and slide a 15 in there just to see. This is a 15. We're going on number 1 intake. And there's no way that's going in. It's not even close. So that's good news for me. That means the last time I did it, it's at least in spec, but we're gonna go ahead and start counting down from 15 to see what it's really at. Now, if it's really obvious that whatever gauge you're trying to put in there won't go in there, you can skip a few. Like I just tried to put the 15 in there. It's not going in. I'm gonna go down to 12, skip a few thousandths, and see if this one will go in there. Yep, and this 12 is not going in either. So try the 15, won't go in. Try the 12, won't go in. Try the 10 will go in. So that means I'm at 10 or 11. I'm not going to try the 11 because even 11 is way within spec. So I know that this one's right, and I'm not gonna adjust it. It's within spec. It's fine. What I will do at the very end is go ahead and go over the torque for all of these jam nuts on the adjusters just to make sure they're all tight, but I'm not gonna loosen it and adjust it at all. I'm hoping this will be a quick job and I won't have to adjust any of them, but if that's the case, I'll go ahead and adjust at least one so that you guys know how to do it, and I'll explain what it should feel like when you're in the correct tightness for that feeler gauge. But we're gonna go ahead and do 2 and 4 on the intake. We're gonna check them at least, and then if they're good as well, we'll just keep moving on to the exhaust. So we're gonna do 2. $15 is a no-go. We'll try a 10 just to speed this up. So we've run into a problem, and it might be my last experience with not bolting on or not doing overhead, just bolting it back on, but my 10 thousandths feeler gauge won't fit either, which means it's not where I want it. So we might end up adjusting this one. I'm gonna go ahead and stick a 9 in there. So 9 goes. I'm gonna try the 10 again just to make sure I'm not being an idiot. Okay. So good news. I was just being an idiot. I couldn't get the 10 in there. It's kind of tricky sometimes. If you'll look at the rocker arm, which I know you probably can't see it, but here's your rocker arm, and there's a little piece that can jiggle back and forth on the bottom. In order to slide the feeler gauge under there, you kind of need to lift it up. Just tip it up just a little bit and then put your feeler gauge under it. If you don't, it's kind of hard to just jam something between them. It's a pretty pretty tight tolerance. So I just got a 10 in there. I'm gonna try an 11. Just for funsies, because it's a Sunday and I have nothing else to do except entertain entertain you. Let's try the 11. Okay, 11 also goes, which means that one's a little loose. We're going to try a 12. Also goes. We're getting looser and looser. Let's try a 14. If this 14 doesn't go, I know it's probably at like 13. The 14 doesn't really want to go in. It kind of slides in, but it doesn't want to go in, which means it's probably at 13. Which means I'm going to adjust this because I want it at 10. So what we're going to do, take our 9/16 wrench, come over to, don't go anywhere, go over to number 2 on the intake, and we're going to bust this nut loose. We're going to bust this nut loose everywhere. And then what we're going to do is take our 10 thousandths, going to stick our 10 thousandths in there. Just like that. And we're going to take our Allen key. And we're going to turn this adjuster. I usually like to get them all the way tight where it can't move and then slowly back it off until I get that nice, smooth, magnetic pull. Just like that. I go a little tighter, it doesn't move. I go back to that magnetic pull. So I know I want it right there. So I'm going to go ahead and hold this with the Allen key, and I'm going to take my wrench and just kind of tighten this down a little bit. And then we'll give it a torque with our Matco torque wrench. That was way too expensive. Put it at 18 foot-pounds. So that one is adjusted. Now after we torque it, just to make sure it didn't bind up and move that adjuster screw after we torque that nut, I'm going to go ahead and keep that feeler gauge in there while we torque it, and then we're going to slide it back and forth. That's good. That one is adjusted. Now, you don't have to do this, but it helps. I like to put a paint mark on everything that I've adjusted. You can see the previous paint marks from me adjusting this. So I know that 1 and 2 are good. So now we're going to do 4. We're going to speed this process up a little bit, just because usually overhead should take you like 15 to 20 minutes, and it's been 13 minutes and I've just kind of been talking. So we're going to go ahead and speed this up. Grab our 15. Go to number 4. a no-go. Bump down to 13. Kind of wants to go, probably a 12. Stick our 12 in there. Well, doesn't want to go either. Grab our 11. 11's not happy either, which means that it's at least at 10. And I can feel it jiggling. So let's go ahead and try an 8. And if the 8 goes or does not go through it, the 8 goes through it, I know it's at least at 8 and no bigger than 11, so we're right in that area where it needs to be. That's not 4. 8 goes in. I know it's at 9 or 10 now, so I know that it's probably at 10 because I set it at 10, and it's probably not going to get tighter unless something ridiculous happened. I don't know, but probably at 10. So we're going to go ahead and mark that. That one's good. Now I know that 1, 2, and 4 on the intake are good. Now we need to do 1, 3, and 5 on the exhaust, which means grab our 30. On this side. .30's a no-go. 30's the max spec. We're doing the same thing but with different specs. So now let's do a 24. Go down 6 thousandths. Make sure it didn't loosen. 24 doesn't want to go. That's good. Let's just jump right to 20. Let's just see. Twenty's on this side. 20 goes, and it feels perfect. Cool. That one's at 20 or 19. It's kind of hard to tell sometimes, but it's close enough. 20 goes in, and it has the perfect magnetic pull when you try and slide that feeler gauge between the crosshead or the valve bridge and the rocker lever. So I'm gonna leave it. And I'm gonna mark it. Now, I'm not gonna go through all of them on camera because I think you get the point. But I am gonna check all these real quick and torque them, and then I'm gonna bar the engine over again, and then we'll adjust the rest of them, or I'll show you how to do that. But for now, I'm just gonna go ahead and check them all. It seems like I'm not adjusting them much. They're all pretty good, which is good. Apparently that means that you can do overhead and then unbolt your rocker pedestals and then just bolt them right back on, and it'll be pretty damn close at least. But yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and do that off camera, and then we'll be right back. We'll be right back. Well, we're all done, at least with the first go around. Now, if you've gotten to that point, you've adjusted 1, 2, and 4 on the intake, and 1, 3, and 5 on the exhaust. So I live in the middle of nowhere. Like the middle of nowhere. There's a dude on a bike. Just rode past my house. That's crazy. Anyways, if you've adjusted 1, 2, and 4 on the intake and 1, 3, and 5 on the exhaust, it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing on the next rotation. You're going to bar the engine over 1 full rotation again and 360 degrees, and you're going to put that mark back in the 12 o'clock position, and at that point you can adjust everything else. Now I'll put a little piece of text up to tell you exactly which ones to adjust, but it's going to be all the other ones. Basically everything you didn't adjust already is going to be adjusted on that stroke, or that outer base circle thing, you know. But I'm going to go ahead and rotate this over 360 degrees, do the rest of them. It's the same exact thing, but so far everything that I've said you can successfully do overhead. All I will say is at the very end, once you've adjusted everything, go over all of these jam nuts on the back of the rocker levers, torque them all to 18 foot-pounds, make sure they're all adjusted and torqued, and then you should be good to put your valve cover back on, put your breathers back on, and then put your little cover thing back on. Everything should be good. Now while mine's off, I'm going to go ahead and clean up my valve cover and get all this extra oil off. If you didn't, when you first took the valve cover off, go ahead and, before you put it back on, inspect everything. If you know what you're looking for, you can, I wouldn't take a tool to it, but you can go ahead and take your fingers and just make sure none of these injector harness nuts are loose. If you take a tool to it, you might actually loosen them, or if you go to tighten them, you can snap them. These things are super sensitive, but now's a good time to do it while your valve cover's off. It's not hard to get off, but who wants to randomly just come out here and rip their valve cover off for no reason? So, well, it's already off. Go ahead and check all your injector harness nuts. Make sure none of them are just rattling loose. And if they're not, loose, I guess you're good. After you make sure everything's tight. Whoa! Almost died. My topside crawler is kind of useless, but yeah, that's where we're at. And thanks for watching. Well, that's about it. Pause. Well, that's about it. All done. Valve cover's back on. Crankcase breather cover's back on. Got all of our tools accounted for. There's no Allen keys sitting inside of the valve cover. That should be about it. But thanks for watching. If it helped, go ahead and give me a like and a subscribe. I just put my oily hand all over my brand new jeans. Why am I wearing these to do this? I don't know. Terrible idea. In fact, I only own 2 pairs of jeans. This was the nice one. But you're welcome. But thanks for watching. If it helped, please leave a subscribe and a like. And happy Sunday.
All right, bye.